Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is featuring the first hunter build for Season 17, featuring Solar 3.0, and I gotta say, it's a personal favorite of mine. Not only does this build have some of the best intrinsic regen of any build I've ever seen before, but it's also one of the most fun I've ever played, and you'll see why in a second. Before we get into it though, be sure to like and subscribe for more Destiny 2 content like this, and let me know down in the comments below what builds you're looking forward to for later this season, and any recommendations for the channel you might have. Thanks in advance. Getting right into it, we are on Solar 3.0. As far as supers go, I'm personally using Blade Barrage because it technically does get a buff with Knock 'em Down for damage, and I'll go into it a little bit later on if you want to actually use Blade Barrage to its full DPS potential using a swap exotic. However, if you want to use Golden Gun Deadshot or Golden Gun Marksman, you can totally use that too. I'm also using Gambler's Dodge, which grants us our melee ability whenever we dodge near combatants. I'm also using our weighted throwing knife and the trip mine grenade charge. I'll get into why that is in a little bit. As far as aspects go, I'm also using Knock 'em Down, which in our case with Blade Barrage, we have a lot more projectiles whenever we cast our super, therefore dealing a lot more damage. And while we're Radiant, anytime that we get a melee kill with our throwing knife, it auto-refunds it, essentially bypassing the precision requirement found normally on the weighted throwing knife. In Gunpowder Gamble, which whenever we defeat targets with solar abilities, solar debuffs, or solar weapons, it allows us to charge up an improvised solar grenade, and that solar grenade then takes the place of our regular grenade, and we can then throw that, attach it to an enemy, and it deals a lot of damage in a very large area. As far as fragments go, I'm using Ember of Torches, which allows powered melee attacks against combatants to make us Radiant, Ember of Singeing, which allows our class ability to recharge faster when we scorch targets, and Ember of Empyrean, which allows solar weapon or ability final blows to extend the duration of Radiant and Restoration to us. You can probably already see a lot of the intrinsic synergy that we're having with this build, which primarily revolves around stacking on many stacks of Scorch to multiple enemies, chaining our grenade and our melees back to back, getting our class ability back as a way to kind of bypass the melee synergy in case we lose it, and effectively we're just going to be spamming our grenade and melee charge constantly, all the while having restoration effects and our radiant effects being nearly infinite due to the ability to constantly refund it with solar eliminations. Getting into the mods for today, on our helmet is Elemental Charge, which whenever we pick up 2 solar elemental wells, it grants us 2 stacks of Charge with Light. Any other elemental well that we pick up, it grants us 1 stack. And I'm also using a Solar Siphon mod and an Ashes to Assets mod. Solar Siphon just so we can actually get orbs of power through solar weapon kills, as well as Ashes to Assets because again we're throwing our grenade a ton with this build, might as well get more super energy with it too. Onto our arms, and our exotic for today is Young Ahamkarah Spine. For those who don't know, it increases our trip mine grenade duration and blast radius, and ability damage with our trip mine grenade refunds grenade energy. It's actually a pretty absurd amount, especially when you get multiple adds in the single explosion with the trip mine, which is not hard to do. And whenever we combine it with stuff like firepower later on in the build, we'll literally have cases where we can just end up throwing the Gunpowder Gamble grenade, which is the superpower grenade essentially, and just chain that over and over again because of the way that these interact with the intrinsic grenade regen. As far as mods go, I'm using Elemental Armaments, which allow us to generate solar wells after getting multiple solar weapon kills. I'm also using 2 stacks of Impact Induction, which whenever we cause damage with our melee attack, it reduces our grenade cooldown. And effectively, since we'll almost never run out of our melee charge because we can get it with body kills while Radiant and headshots just naturally, we're effectively always going to be able to get our grenade back pretty consistently just by dealing damage with our knife. Under our chest piece for today is Elemental Ordnance, which whenever we actually get a grenade kill, we'll then be able to spawn a solar elemental well. I will say if you want to swap this out for say Font of Might and go with a lot more offensive power on your weapons, you can totally do that. However, you want to spec into more ability synergy, which is what I'm mainly focusing on, I would highly recommend Elemental Ordnance just again to help double up your well spawns and also give you another source for well spawns to help enable better class synergy. But again, Font of Might would be a great option here too. I'm also using Armor of the Dying Star just for the 2 damage resistances against solar and void damage. And I'm also using a Trace Rifle Reserve just because we are going to be using Prometheus Lens with this build. Yes, you heard that right, Prometheus Lens, and it's actually incredible how well it performs, so I just want to make sure we have as much ammo as we can. Onto our legs. The first mob we're using is Firepower, which whenever we're charged with light and we use our grenade, it'll consume 1 stack of Charge with Light and give us 20% of our grenade charge back. Whenever we stack this on top of stuff like Young Ahamkarah's Spine, the intrinsic regen of our grenade is absolutely incredible, and we'll end up in many situations where we just get a full regen of our grenade after hitting a few adds with our trip mine. And this even works with the Gunpowder Gamble grenade as well. So this is how you're seeing certain situations where we'll actually throw multiple Gunpowder Gamble grenades when we technically should only be able to throw 1. I'm also using Absolution, which reduces all of our ability cooldowns each time we pick up an orb of power, and Innervation, which reduces our grenade cooldown specifically, which then stacks on top of Absolution every time we pick up an orb of power as well. Swap exotic I highly recommend using is Star Eater Scales if you're interested, and this would just be for whenever you have your super. For those that don't know, with Knock 'em Down and Star Eater Scales at ×8 stacks, which means you pick up 8 orbs of power when your super is full while wearing these, Blade Barrage actually does the most damage in the game, and it's not even close. The next best damaging super is technically Thunder Crash, and this does 50% more damage than a Thunder Crash. And the damage you can output with these is actually pretty insane. I've seen people do one phase, one floor, the Caretaker boss in Val. I've seen people absolutely obliterate dungeon bosses with just 3 people using their super and combining with something like Tractor Cannon. It does absolutely insane damage in my testing, about 50% more than a Thunder Crash. So it's definitely worth the hassle of swapping to this in case you're interested. And then onto our mark. The first one is Class A Restoration. This is an absolute must because the survivability that this grants us is unmatched by anything else in the game. I've said it before in the last build guide, Restoration is effectively invincibility on a timer, and the fact that we can now auto reproc it with the new fragment unlocked means that we'll always have Restoration as long as we're getting solar kills of any kind. And then Solar Fulmination, which are ignitions to increase damage and an increased radius. However, if you want to swap this out for, say, another stack of firepower and then double up on your grenade regen, you can totally do that as well. However, I think you can already start to see a lot of the synergy that this class has. Again, mainly applying Scorch effects is a great way to actually synergize well with this class because we get our dodge back, which when we use our dodge, we get our melee ability back, and our melee ability can also automatically regen from getting precision kills or body kills whenever we're radiant. Our melee damage then intrinsically generates our grenades, which have auto-regenning of their own, which then stack with Gunpowder Gamble grenades, which then do increased damage, all the while getting Radiant, which is a 25% buff to our weapons, and Restoration, which is basically invincibility on a timer. And we even have the option of hot swapping to an exotic to get the best damaging super in the entire game. And of course, the weapons are going to complement that even further. The exotic for today is Prometheus Lens, and yes, you heard that right. We're actually using Prometheus Lens in PvE. So for those that don't know, at the start of Season 17, this actually got the intrinsic Scorch effect that whenever we sustain damage to targets, it actually applies Scorch to them. And this perfectly synergizes with our class abilities. Because remember, not only is Scorching going to give us back our abilities, but also if we use our charged melee on a scorched enemy, it then causes an ignition, which is a giant explosion that intrinsically benefits everything else as well. So the more stacks of Scorch that we actually are applying to enemies, the more we can use our weighted throwing knife to actually detonate on them, and those ignitions do a ton of damage in a very good AoE size damage pool. So this is an absolute must use with this build. Not to mention that this is also a trace rifle in PvE, meaning they got a 25% weapon damage buff at the start of the season. If you're looking for an alternative for this, Retrace Path is also a solar trace rifle. I actually showed off in the last build guide, and that one basically has the same thing going for it. It just does not apply Scorch stacks. However, with something like Retrace Path, you can get One for All, which is going to be a 30% weapon damage buff. You can equip a Minor mod, which is a 7% damage buff. And you can use it with, say, Font of Might and Radiant, which is going to be a 25% additional buff as well. So it's really easy to see how well these things actually tear through ads in PvE. As far as other weapons go, you can really use whatever fits your playstyle. I'm personally using Soulless Scar, which I have with Chain Reaction, just for really strong ad clear and also pretty decent DPS. However, if you wanted to use Ascendancy, or like I mentioned, if you use Retrace Path, Yallarhorn, or Parasite, both are really good options and synergize really, really well with this build. You can also use the Linear Fusion Rifle, Cataclysmic, from the raid. I don't have the best roll on it, but if you have a decent roll and invest with Font of Might, it can actually do really strong damage. And I'm just using a Fatebringer that I have kind of in the back for ad clear with Explosive Payload and Firefly. But again, if you have something particular you want to use, you can totally use that as well. Like I said, this is one of the best naturally regenning intrinsic ability classes I've ever seen. And overall, Solar 3.0 is incredibly fun to play with this. Again, not only do we have access to Trip Mine Grenade and weighted throwing knife charges constantly with this build, but we also have the potential for the best damaging super in the game, as well as just really strong regen and ability buff damage, as well as near constant restoration, which is the best healing buff in the entire game, and near constant radiant, which is giving us a 25% weapon damage buff consistently. And especially with the new fragment unlocks, we can have those forever and just keep spamming our abilities, keep being aggressive with our pushes, and it's incredibly fun to play like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the support on these videos. Let me know down in the comments for any builds you're interested to see coming up in the future, as I do have a few more in the works, as well as what you thought of the build today. Thank you guys so much, and have a great one.
Let's try that teleporter.